They took my dock last Wednesday. They ripped it right out of the water at dawn without even asking. I remember standing on my porch in my bathrobe, coffee mug shaking in my hand, wondering if I was still asleep. My father built that dock 25 years ago with his own hands. I learned to fish there. And now it was gone, hauled off by the Homeowners Association under the orders of the new president, a woman named Karen Larson, who swept into our community 6 months ago with a self-righteous attitude and a suspicious gleam in her eye. I never imagined that I'd be dealing with a full-scale war on my own property, but here we are. If you saw a team of strangers dismantling something so precious to your family, would you stay silent, or would you fight back? Let me know what you'd do, because that's exactly what I asked myself on that chilly morning while I watched my beloved dock being tossed onto a trailer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to fling my coffee in their faces, but I froze. That kind of paralysis that hits when you know you're facing someone in a position of local power, someone with official paperwork in hand, brandishing phrases like community standards and safety violations. It's the kind of intimidation that can stall the bravest heart, at least for a moment. I'm Jake Wheeler, by the way, 34 years old, single, but that's mostly because I'm married to my job as a freelance civil engineer. My house sits on the eastern shore of Crescent Lake, one of the few spots in the county where regular people can still afford a waterfront view. It's not some fancy resort area, and that's always been the charm. My father worked 2 jobs so he could buy this place. He spent his weekends adding little improvements, a stone path down to the water, a small boathouse, and, yes, a sturdy wooden dock that held up remarkably well over the decades. My mother used to say he loved that dock more than his own living room, though he'd deny it with a grin. Our neighborhood is called Lakeside Haven, though the last few months have made it feel more like Lakeside Hell. We've had an HOA for years, but it used to be laid back. Small monthly fees that covered garbage collection, a basic landscaping service around the main entrance, and a yearly barbecue. Then Karen Larson arrived. She bought a house down by the southern tip of the lake, an impressive property with a wraparound porch. Rumor was she'd made a fortune in corporate real estate, but nobody knew the details. She attended one HOA meeting, then another, and before anyone realized what was happening, she ran for president unopposed. The rest of us were too busy with work, families, or simply uninterested in that level of involvement. We didn't suspect she had big plans, big, destructive plans. So, after she got elected, new guidelines and compliance forms started rolling in. Stricter lawn requirements, rigid rules about house color palettes, and even regulations about seasonal decorations. At first it was annoying, but tolerable. Then came the real bombshell, a waterfront beautification initiative. According to Karen, many of the old docks around Crescent Lake were eyesores that dragged down property values. She also claimed they might be unsafe. She demanded everyone submit updated permits for any structure on the shoreline, including boathouses and docks, or face hefty fines. I had all the papers from my dad's original building permits, plus subsequent inspections that proved the dock was sound. I copied them, mailed them to the HOA office, and even dropped off a set in person. 2 weeks passed. I got no response. Then came that morning. That's when I saw the crew, 2 men from a local contractor unbolting the dock boards and hauling them away in a trailer marked Association Property. I stormed outside, heart racing, and confronted them. "Stop! What are you doing?" I shouted, stepping over a torn piece of rope lying in the grass. They looked at me with blank expressions. One of them held up a piece of paper labeled Authorization of Removal. It bore Karen's signature. I demanded they call her immediately, insisted they look at my father's documents. They shrugged. The older man even apologized under his breath, saying he had a family to support and a contract to fulfill. So I stood there, feeling powerless, while they stripped away the last boards. When they finished, they left behind an ugly patch of mud and a few broken pilings sticking out of the water. That's how this war began. But the real question is, should I have marched into court, or should I have done something more direct, more disruptive, more personal? I'd love to know what you'd choose, lawsuit or sabotage. I'm not usually one to break rules, yet seeing the rubble of my father's legacy and hearing rumors of Karen's next moves pushed me beyond my usual calm. The idea of launching a legal battle against a well-connected figure like her felt overwhelming. A different thought took shape. If she wanted a beautiful lake, maybe I'd show up in the middle of her precious HOA function with a few surprises of my own. Before I dive into that plan, let me give you a clearer idea of this place. Crescent Lake covers about 130 acres, shaped somewhat like a half-moon. The eastern side belongs mostly to families like mine who've been here for years. The western side has newer developments, luxury homes, well-groomed lawns, folks with speedboats. My parents bought our place before the area became popular, so our house is older but sits on prime frontage. As I grew up, I spent weekends fishing, learning basic carpentry, and daydreaming about becoming an architect. Instead, I drifted into civil engineering. I also came to love that dock. My father let me carve my initials into one of the boards when I turned 10, something I could see every time I sat there, dangling my feet above the water. The rest of the community includes a wide range of characters: retirees who play golf at sunrise, families with rambunctious kids, and middle-class professionals who commute into the nearby city. We used to have a sense of unity: block parties, volunteer days, a holiday boat parade. Then, Karen took charge of the HOA. It turned out she had connections to a developer known as Lakefront Visionaries. In the rumor mill, that company specialized in upgrading older lake communities by introducing uniform aesthetics, building communal marinas, and basically forcing out longtime residents who either couldn't afford the new fees or didn't want to comply with a million restrictions. One night, I was talking to my friend Hugo, an attorney who lived a few streets over. He said, "Jake, you realize this isn't just about your dock, right? She's systematically removing every private dock that predates 2000. Word is she wants an exclusive community marina to replace them. If enough owners can't afford the retrofitting they demand, they'll be pressured to sell." That revelation made my blood boil. If it was only about the age of the structures or genuine safety hazards, I might have understood. But this was about big money, corporate expansions, and jacking up property values so that families like mine would get squeezed out. I told Hugo I'd fight back. He warned me to proceed carefully. If I made one wrong move, the HOA could fine me until I was drowning in debt. Lawsuits are costly. The association's lawyers wouldn't hesitate to drag me into a lengthy legal process. It took me a few days of reading boring bylaws and digging through old paperwork to see if there was a hidden clause that might protect me. That's when I noticed something: an original agreement that stated any structure built prior to 1995 was grandfathered in, as long as it posed no safety risk. My father's dock absolutely fell under that category, but the HOA had inserted new language about active compliance inspections, requiring every homeowner to re-verify. That gave them room to brand older docks as unfit, no matter how sturdy they actually were. I confronted Karen in person at the HOA office. She was sitting behind a shiny desk with perfect posture and a professional smile that made me uneasy. "Jake, I'm sorry about your father's dock, but I have a responsibility to maintain standards," she said, flipping through a stack of documents. She wore a tailored blazer that looked more expensive than my car. Her eyes had that cold gleam I'd come to recognize, the gaze of someone who only sees numbers, not people. She insisted the removal was perfectly legal. I showed her the old deed. She glanced at it for 2 seconds, gave me a condescending smile, and assured me there must have been an error in my father's paperwork. Then she closed the file and said, "If you have further questions, feel free to submit them in writing. We'll address your concerns at the next community meeting. I hope you understand we're doing this for the good of everyone here. It's about property values and safety." Safety, my foot. The following week I discovered that 2 of my neighbors had also lost their docks in similarly abrupt actions. Each time, the HOA left behind a bright orange notice taped to their front door, citing failure to comply with the revised guidelines. One neighbor, Patricia, was a 70-year-old widow whose husband had passed just a year ago. She was in tears when she told me how they'd threatened her with daily fines if she didn't tear down her boathouse. She had no clue how to fight them. It was heart-wrenching. That's when rumors began swirling that Karen was planning a major social event, the Lakeside Summer Gala, to be hosted on a newly renovated common area that used to be a public boat launch. This gala would bring in prospective investors, local officials, and real estate contacts to see the beautiful transformation under her leadership. It would be a showcase of how advanced the community had become. There would be champagne, live music, and invitations extended only to the right sort of people: prominent realtors, well-off buyers, local politicians who might rewrite zoning restrictions to favor large corporate expansions. Something inside me snapped. If she wanted to flaunt her fancy version of Crescent Lake, maybe it was time for me to reveal the ugly reality. But I couldn't just barge in and start yelling. Karen held the mic, the security detail, and the legal muscle. That's when a radical thought crossed my mind. What if I staged a boat-based protest? Except I no longer had a dock, but I did have a friend with a pontoon, plus some serious audio equipment from my college band days. I started plotting. In parallel, I reached out to anyone else who'd felt wronged by the HOA. Patricia, a teacher named Sean, a young couple who'd recently gotten married and found themselves drowning in new fees for landscaping violations. Most of them were afraid to speak out openly. They worried about retaliation, about daily fines, about hostility from neighbors who supported Karen. I promised them anonymity, but asked for any information that might prove corruption or personal gain, and the puzzle pieces began to surface. Sean found an invoice for landscaping improvements that the HOA had paid for, but it was double the standard market rate. A quick search revealed that the landscaping company belonged to Karen's sister-in-law, meaning she was funneling association funds to her relatives. Patricia had heard from her nephew, a city council aide, that Karen was lobbying to privatize more of the lakefront if she could prove the community needed an official, managed marina. All these bits of knowledge told a story of a leader who was twisting regulations for personal gain and ignoring the well-being of the long-standing residents. Then I got lucky. While rummaging through my father's old office, I discovered not just the original construction plans for the dock, but also a document signed by the county commissioner stating that any lakefront expansion or major alteration must undergo an environmental review. That included large communal structures like the type of marina rumored to be in the works. The form was never filed with the county, meaning Karen was sidestepping the law to push forward her project. My father must have saved this piece of paper because he'd once battled a small housing developer who tried to build over wetlands. If that was still valid, it could throw a wrench into Karen's show. As the date of the Lakeside Summer Gala approached, the chatter reached a frenzy. They were erecting an enormous tent on the common lawn near the water. I heard talk of a band, catering, valet parking. Meanwhile, I made my own calls. My friend Martin, who specialized in sound engineering, agreed to help me set up a system that could broadcast across the entire lakeshore if placed correctly. Another friend, Denise, worked as an environmental journalist. She promised to watch from the sidelines, camera in hand, ready to record any fiasco that might unfold. I wanted to ensure that if Karen decided to spin the truth afterward, there would be documented evidence. I settled on a plan that was bold, maybe reckless. The day of the gala, I'd launch a borrowed pontoon out of a small cove hidden by tall reeds on the north side of the lake. I'd load it with speakers powered by a portable generator. Then, precisely when Karen took the stage to impress her VIP guests, I'd broadcast a live message detailing how the HOA forcibly removed personal property, threatened seniors, and allegedly misused funds. Alongside that, I'd display large banners calling for community unity and demanding transparency. People might call it sabotage. I called it shining a spotlight on hidden corruption. In the days leading up to the event, I wrestled with doubt. Was I going too far? Could I handle the blowback if the association decided to sue me for defamation or harassment? I actually woke up one night drenched in sweat, imagining Karen's smug face as she slapped me with thousands in legal fees. But each time I faltered, I pictured that empty patch of mud where my dock used to stand, and thought about the older residents losing their life savings to these unjust rules. My father's memory deserved better. So, I pressed on. The night before the gala, I stayed up inspecting the generator's spark plugs and testing the microphone. Martin gave me a rundown of how to operate the mixing board so that I could keep the volume balanced and avoid blowing the speakers. My plan wasn't just to blare noise. I needed my words to be crystal clear. I also prepared a folder of screenshots, emails from neighbors detailing fines, pictures of destroyed docks, the suspicious landscaping invoice, and the county commissioner's signature. If the moment was right, I intended to show them on a portable screen or pass them around among the crowd. Sean agreed to paddle out in a kayak behind me, carrying extra copies of key documents, just in case. When dawn arrived on the day of the gala, the sky was a stark blue, cloudless, as if the universe was granting perfect weather for a showdown. I felt a tremor in my hands as I loaded gear onto the pontoon. I had a cooler of bottled water, a small set of life jackets, and the crucial audio equipment. My phone buzzed with texts. "Good luck, man," from Martin. "Be careful, Jake," from Patricia. "We'll watch from the West Bank," from Denise. By mid-morning, cars were streaming into the newly paved parking area near the lawn. Through a pair of binoculars, I spotted ushers wearing crisp uniforms, guiding guests toward the large white tent. Women in elegant dresses, men in tailored suits, a separate station for local officials. It was all so upscale it made me sick. Shortly after noon, the festivities began. Soft jazz music drifted across the lake. The caterers rolled out tables of hors d'oeuvres. I took a deep breath, started the pontoon's engine, and eased it out of the hidden cove. My heart drummed in my chest. In about 10 minutes, I'd drift into full view of the gala. By then, Karen would be preparing to address her guests, touting the success of her beautification campaign. A flash of rage burned in me. How dare she stand there, praising her own work, when she had inflicted so much stress on families who had been here for generations? Sure enough, as I cut the engine and began coasting, I could see Karen stepping up to a podium. She wore a fitted navy blue dress, her posture immaculate, her chin held high. Behind her, large posters showed the future plans for Lakeside Haven: a brand-new marina, tennis courts, uniform fences, carefully manicured flower beds. I spotted at least 3 local politicians in the front row, nodding politely. This was the perfect moment. I flicked on the generator. The hum was steady. Martin's custom rig lit up. I tapped the microphone, hearing my own breath echo over the lake. Karen paused mid-sentence, scanning the shoreline for the source. "Greetings, neighbors and distinguished guests," I said, my voice amplified. Heads whipped around. People stood up from their chairs, shading their eyes. Some pointed. "I'm Jake Wheeler. Perhaps you recognize my name from the HOA's removal orders. If not, let me enlighten you." A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. I spotted Karen's cheeks flush red. She said something to a man in a black suit, likely security. He lifted a radio to his mouth. "Before you listen to another promise from Ms. Larson," I continued, "you should know the real price of her so-called improvements. You see, she had my father's dock ripped from my property without warning. She's done the same to multiple neighbors, threatening them with crippling fines if they don't comply. And do you know why? Because she intends to replace all private docks with a privatized marina. That means big profits for her developer friends, not better safety, not real community building." Karen marched toward the water's edge, heels sinking into the lawn. She waved her arms. I cranked the volume a little higher. "Karen, your guests deserve the truth," I said. My hand tightened on the mic. "You've been using association funds to pay inflated invoices from a landscaping company related to you. You're lobbying for zoning changes that would push out older residents. We've got the paperwork to prove it." Security staff had begun to race down the makeshift pier. One guy in a dark polo tried shouting at me through a megaphone, but my sound system easily overpowered him. At that moment, Sean glided in his kayak behind my pontoon, brandishing a large sign that read, "Stop HOA Corruption." The crowd murmured in surprise, some stepping closer to get a better look. Meanwhile, across the water, residents in paddle boats and canoes began appearing. Word had spread. They wanted to watch the spectacle. Denise was stationed on the shoreline, filming everything. Karen yelled, "Stop this nonsense right now," but I kept going. "Miss Larson removed my father's dock in the name of property values," I said. My voice shook slightly with anger. "She forced a widow to tear down a boathouse she could never afford to rebuild. She's threatened families with fines they can't pay. This is your shining beacon of progress?" I heard uneasy laughter from a small group of younger attendees, and a few stifled gasps from the well-dressed VIPs who probably had no clue these tactics had been used to build their investment opportunities. The band of security men rushed to the end of the pier, possibly thinking they could commandeer a boat or demand I move. But the only vessels moored there were small rowboats belonging to the association. One guard tried to jump in, fumbling with the oars, nearly losing his balance. The entire scene began to resemble a comedic farce, especially when he splashed water all over his slacks and had to paddle in a circle. It was impossible to take them seriously. Karen attempted damage control by grabbing a microphone connected to the stage speakers. Her amplified voice echoed across the lake. "Ladies and gentlemen, please ignore this disruption. Everything he's saying is an outrageous lie. We have documentation proving that these docks were safety hazards. Our only goal is to maintain the highest standards for your benefit." "Says the woman who's connected to lakefront visionaries," I countered, "the same company that has a history of colluding with HOAs to push out longtime residents and flip properties. Would you care to deny that you're on their payroll?" I heard scattered applause from the group that had gathered near the shore. A few people from the upscale crowd seemed uncertain, whispering among themselves, possibly re-evaluating Karen's entire pitch. The presence of local politicians only made it more awkward for her, because the last thing they wanted was to be tied to shady maneuvers that might cost them votes. Karen's face twisted into barely controlled fury. "Mr. Wheeler, you're in violation of multiple noise ordinances and are trespassing on association waters. Cease this at once, or we'll press charges." I let out a sardonic laugh. "Trespassing? On a public lake?" That's interesting, considering I have a copy of the county's statement confirming these waters are open for recreational use. And about the noise ordinance, my friend in City Hall says that you never filed for the correct permit for your party's volume levels, so maybe we should both be quiet. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a fishing knife. My heart pounded as I realized how far I'd gone. But there was no turning back. I had to press forward. Guests? You want to know how she paid for this fancy tent and the elaborate catering? Check the association's recent financial reports. All right. You can't, because they haven't been made public. John began distributing copies of the suspicious invoice from his kayak. Several curious onlookers waded a few steps into the shallow water to get a closer look. We thought we were powerless, I said, voice resonating across the placid lake's surface. The microphone wavered in my grip. But if we stand together, we can demand accountability. We can demand that our community remain open to everyone, not just those who can afford to pay Karen's inflated fees. We can protect the docks our families built. We can remain a real neighborhood. Karen was practically seething. A hush fell on the crowd, as if they were waiting for her next move. She locked eyes with me across the water, her microphone still in hand. This man is attempting to sabotage an event that is meant to celebrate positive developments, she declared. He's always been a troublemaker, refusing to comply with even basic rules to keep our lake safe and aesthetically pleasing. I only ask that you examine the facts instead of listening to baseless accusations. Then she beckoned one of the local council members, a short man with a polite smile, clearly unsure of how to react. She tried to pull him into a statement supporting the HOA's decision, but he hesitated, mumbled something about needing more information, and stepped back. It was a minor victory for me. At that moment, one of my neighbor's kids, a 10-year-old boy named Caleb, who was standing on the shore with his parents, shouted, "You took his dock! That's not fair!" It was a small voice, but it carried surprisingly far, and laughter broke out among the residents behind him. Karen glared in that direction, her authority unraveling before everyone's eyes. Determined not to let her regroup, I switched the microphone to a recorded track. Martin had helped me splice together voice memos from neighbors describing the heavy-handed tactics they'd faced. Final notices taped to doors at midnight, threatening calls, and disconnection from association amenities. Each short snippet played loud and clear, echoing across the water. The finishing line was Patricia's trembling voice saying, "They told me if I didn't pay the new assessment, I'd lose my home. Why would someone be so cruel?" Karen tried to speak over it, but her smaller sound system was no match. She waved frantically at a few staff members. One of them ran to the stage controls, apparently to cut the power or drown out my broadcast with music, but something malfunctioned. The resulting feedback squeal was ear-splitting. People covered their ears, some stepping away from the tent, complaining. Meanwhile, I turned down my volume just a notch, enough to stop hurting eardrums, but not enough to lose the advantage. More security guards scurried onto a motorized dinghy they'd hastily set up. They chugged toward my pontoon, presumably to force me to stop. Sean paddled around them, holding up his phone, filming the entire comedic chase. They revved the tiny motor, but it sputtered. Apparently, they had no clue how to navigate beyond idle speed. Their approach was painfully slow, so I just reversed a bit, drifting farther out. The crowd watched with stunned fascination. Karen was left alone at the shoreline, her prestige event descending into chaos. That's when the local reporter from Channel 9, who'd only planned on getting some pleasant B-roll of the gala, saw an even bigger story unfolding. She started filming the confrontation. I spotted her camera pointed directly at Karen, capturing the anger contorting her features. I can't say I took pleasure in humiliating her on such a public stage, but let's be honest, I felt a deep sense of vindication, imagining my father smiling from above. Eventually, Karen's security detail gave up the aquatic pursuit and turned back, humiliated. I flipped off the generator and rested the microphone on my lap, letting the natural sound of lapping water take over. The tension lingered in the air as people tried to figure out what to do next. Some guests hurriedly left, not wanting to be associated with potential scandal. Others lingered, looking to Karen for answers. The entire scene was surreal. The fancy gala had turned into a spectacle of power gone wrong. Karen, desperate to regain control, announced, "We will hold an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow to address these allegations." Her voice cracked slightly on the word allegations. Then she pushed past a cluster of attendees and disappeared behind the tent. The background jazz resumed, though it was far from the elegant ambiance she'd intended. The hush of confusion among the guests slowly turned into fragmented conversations. A few started approaching the edge of the water, calling out to me or speaking among themselves. "Is it true? That's horrible. I had no idea." They realized in that moment that maybe they'd only heard one side of the story. Maybe there was more to the cleanup initiative than they'd been told. I let my pontoon drift closer, though carefully staying out of range of any official attempt to seize the boat. Denise sprinted over to me from the sidelines, giving me a big thumbs up from the grass. She'd been recording everything, capturing the meltdown for posterity and for the local news if it came to that. My phone buzzed non-stop with text from neighbors. Some congratulated me, others warned me that Karen would retaliate. But in my gut, I felt calmer than I'd been in weeks. Exposing her hypocrisy for even a few minutes had lifted a weight from my mind. That night I moored the pontoon behind a friend's property, uncertain if I should expect an angry letter or a lawsuit from the HOA. Meanwhile, social media lit up with clips of my demonstration. Sean had posted a short video where I confronted Karen, and it spread faster than a grass fire in summer. Even folks outside our community expressed outrage. Some commented about their own bad experiences with HOAs. Others laughed at how incompetent the security guards looked. A few trolls criticized me for stooping to public humiliation instead of following official channels. But that's how it goes. The next afternoon, the HOA's emergency meeting took place at the community hall. It was packed. Residents who rarely attended turned out in droves. I spotted Karen at the front, flanked by a couple of her board members, both with uneasy expressions. She called the meeting to order with a shaky gavel strike. I half expected security to toss me out, but evidently she had realized that would cause even more of a scene. Karen began. "We've gathered here to address the disruptive incident at the gala and the misinformation being spread about our association's policies." She tried to look composed, though her voice betrayed tension. "Let me state for the record that the HOA has acted in the best interest of property values and the safety of our residents. Certain older docks, including Mr. Wheeler's, were found to be unstable." I stood up, raising my hand. "Where's the inspection report?" I asked, letting my voice echo through the room. "Show me the documentation claiming my dock was structurally unsound." She paused, glanced at a stack of papers as if searching for an answer she didn't have. The crowd stirred, some people craning their necks to see if she'd produce anything legitimate. One of her board allies tried to deflect. "We have procedures in place. Not every safety inspection is immediately available to the public, but we acted under advisement from our legal counsel." His uncertain tone suggested he was reading from a script he didn't fully believe. "Actually," I interjected, I have original records proving that my father's dock passed county inspection less than a year before he died. No code violations, no structural issues, and I have a statement from a licensed engineer who recently examined it. Then I lifted a piece of paper. That engineer was me, I added. A ripple of laughter and applause spread among neighbors who knew my background. Karen's frustration mounted. She tried to redirect. Mr. Wheeler has a personal bias. He's not an unbiased party in this matter. We must rely on external consultants. So produce those external consultants' names, I countered, stepping forward. Who exactly deemed my dock dangerous enough for immediate removal? The hush that followed was deafening. Karen glanced at a younger board member as if she expected him to jump in, but he stared at his shoes. The entire facade of efficiency she'd constructed began to crumble. Finally, Karen blurted, "We cannot reveal all of our evidence at this time due to legal confidentiality. But rest assured our priority is preserving the aesthetic and market value of Lakeside Haven." Her slip was evident. She conflated safety with aesthetics. People in the audience muttered or shook their heads, clearly unimpressed. She tried to restore order with a forced smile. "Let's address each concern in an orderly manner, starting with—" A voice from the back interrupted. It belonged to Harold, a retired accountant. "Karen," he said, "I examined the association's budget and discovered missing funds, specifically under the line item for landscaping enhancement. Care to explain where that money went?" An uneasy stir spread across the room. "You have no business snooping in internal finances," Karen snapped, but her tone sounded more panicked than authoritative. "Who gave you access to that data?" "It's public record for association members," Harold replied. "You can't hide something that's supposed to be transparent. And from what I can tell, you paid almost twice the going rate for lawn work over at the south entrance. That's a huge red flag." By now, even a few board members started eyeing Karen with suspicion. It was as though her entire strategy of intimidation was unraveling under persistent questioning. She tried to reassert control, but found herself stammering. "All right, if you insist on painting me as some kind of villain, go ahead. I was only doing my duty by removing unsightly old docks and ensuring we elevate Lakeside Haven to a higher standard. If that means cutting out dead weight, so be it. Not everyone can keep up with progress." There it was, her genuine attitude laid bare. A unified gasp ran through the crowd, followed by outraged voices. Karen attempted to hush them, but no longer held the moral high ground. She'd exposed herself as elitist, willing to sacrifice the interests of long-time residents for her own vision of a wealthier, standardized community. Several people started demanding an immediate vote of no confidence in her leadership. She tried to adjourn the meeting prematurely, but the rest of the board refused. It was chaos, a swirl of angry calls, accusations, demands for financial transparency. In the end, the board voted to form an independent committee of 5 residents, none of whom were close to Karen, to investigate the finances and the suspicious dock removals. Under pressure, Karen agreed to step aside from her role until the investigation concluded. She stomped out of the hall, slamming the door behind her, ignoring the reporters snapping photos and taking notes. As she passed me, she glared daggers. I expected her to say something, maybe threaten me with a lawsuit, but she said nothing. The look in her eyes, though, told me she was ready to scratch me out of existence if she could. Within a few weeks, the committee's findings were made public. They confirmed that Karen had been funneling money into inflated contracts that benefited her acquaintances. She was also collaborating with lakefront visionaries to push a new marina plan that would privatize most of the shoreline. The committee recommended criminal charges for misappropriation of HOA funds. Several of Karen's supporters distanced themselves overnight. Lakefront visionaries, sensing the negative publicity, withdrew any immediate proposals, but the damage to Karen's reputation was irreversible. Meanwhile, the HOA board, now under the temporary leadership of a neighbor named Sandra, a straight-talking woman who'd lived by the lake for 2 decades, reversed many of Karen's more draconian regulations. The daily fines were suspended. A plan was set in motion to compensate homeowners who had lost their docks without a proper inspection and hearing process. In the next official meeting, they even voted to pay for the reconstruction of my father's dock. I insisted on helping with the labor, wanting to personally restore what had been stolen. The day we began building, a group of residents volunteered, with tools in hand, ready to pitch in. The sense of solidarity moved me. This was the real essence of a caring neighborhood, not some corporate vision of uniform perfection. Karen never apologized publicly. She ended up selling her house a couple of months later. Rumor had it that she left the state entirely, possibly to start fresh in a place where no one knew her reputation. Some folks said she might try the same tactic in another unsuspecting neighborhood. If so, I hope they see through her faster than we did. With Karen gone, Lakeside Haven began to heal. We reinstated the tradition of a holiday boat parade. Even a few new residents joined in. Neighbors started conversations about how to respectfully maintain the lakefront without trampling anyone's rights. We learned that vigilance is necessary when it comes to local governance. You can't just ignore elections or let someone with questionable motives run the show. More importantly, we learned the power of standing together, that a determined community can expose corruption and restore fairness. As for me, I stand on my new butt-class click dock, freshly built to honor my father's original design. I run my fingers over the railing, feeling the sturdy lumber under my palms, inhaling the scent of lake water and possibility. The memory of how they towed away the old boards still stings. But I find comfort in how everything played out. We didn't just defeat Karen, we proved that no matter how imposing an authority figure appears, no single individual or organization can override genuine community spirit. My father used to say, "A dock is more than wood. It's a point of connection between your home and the waters that sustain us." I get it now on a deeper level. This dock represents resilience, a testament to standing firm against greed and intimidation. So what would you have done if an HOA Karen snatched your dock without warning? Would you have let the lawyers handle it quietly, or would you have taken a risk and let that stolen dock crash their big fancy party? Let me know your thoughts. Share this story if you believe communities deserve leaders who listen instead of dictate. And if you want more tales of standing up against power-hungry bullies, subscribe, because I've got plenty of battles left to fight and plenty of neighbors willing to join me. One last reminder, never underestimate a place that looks peaceful on the surface. Beneath the calm waters, there might be unstoppable currents of unity waiting for a spark to unite them.